My daddy died on a Monday. By Friday, his other family had already been to his house, the house he built for us, and walked out with 2 boxes of files. My brother helped them carry it, my uncle held the door. I watched from the kitchen window and didn't say a word. Not because I was too hurt to speak, because I was already working. They thought they had 3 days on me. They had about 48 hours before I started pulling threads. And once I start pulling, I don't stop until I find the knot.
If you're watching this video, tell me where you're from or what time it is for you. Leonard Okafor was 63 years old. He built houses for a living. Had been doing it since before I was born. Okafor Build and Design, Harlow, Georgia. If you drove through our part of the county, you could point at a neighborhood and say Leonard built that. He built the addition on Harlow First Baptist. He built the community center on Vine Street. He built our house on 9 Sycamore Drive with his own hands before I was walking. He was a deacon. He was in the Rotary Club. He coached Little League for 11 years, even though neither me nor my brother played baseball. He was the kind of man who showed up. That's the word people used at his funeral. Over and over, he showed up. They weren't wrong. He did show up. For 2 families. For 17 years. But I didn't know that yet, not the full shape of it, when I sat in the front pew of Harlow First Baptist on a Thursday morning watching 600 people fill a church that seats 450. I sat between my mother and my Aunt Patrice. My brother Marcus sat on my mother's other side, one arm around her shoulder, chin up, pressing his jaw tight the way men do when they want to look steady. Marcus is 37. He took over the business 2 years ago when Daddy started slowing down. He had been the one giving the funeral director instructions, the one taking calls from the insurance company, the one steering my mother through every decision like she was a car he needed to parallel park. He's 2 years older than me. We were never especially close, but I watched him that morning the way I watch everything, quietly, cataloging. I noticed he cried loudly during the opening prayer. I noticed he stopped crying the moment the pastor moved on. I noticed when the collection plate went around that he was checking his phone under his leg. His thumbs were moving fast. I stored that. I do this for a living. I'm a forensic auditor. I work for a firm in Atlanta. I spend my days finding things people tried to make invisible. Money that moves sideways, numbers that don't add up the way someone wants you to think they do. My father used to joke, "Camille don't miss nothing." He wasn't wrong about that either. At the graveside after the service, I saw them for the first time. A woman standing at the tree line, maybe 40. Natural hair, navy dress that had been pressed carefully. 2 teenagers beside her. A boy, tall, with his hands in his pockets. A girl, younger, holding her own elbows. They didn't come forward. They didn't speak to anyone. They just stood there. Respectful distance, watching my father's casket get lowered into the ground. I didn't know who they were, but I knew they weren't strangers. People don't stand at tree lines at funerals unless they have a reason to be there and a reason to stay back. I looked at them once. I looked away. I filed it. I had things to do. The repast was at 9 Sycamore Drive. My mother's church friends filled every surface with food. 3 kinds of potato salad, a whole turkey, banana pudding, and the big yellow bowl my mother only brings out for company. The house smelled like it always did when people came over, like Lysol and vanilla and someone's perfume mixing together in the hallway. Mama sat in her good chair in the living room, the one with the armrests she's always told us not to lean on. She sat straight in it, hands folded, accepting condolences like she was performing a task she had been trained for. Every few minutes she would say, "Thank you. God is good. Leonard was a good man." Same words, steady face. I've never seen my mother fall apart in public, not once. She keeps that for private. I get it from her. I move through the house, refilling trays, accepting hugs from women I half recognized from childhood, accepting handshakes from contractors who told me my father taught them everything they knew. I was pleasant. I was steady. I was also watching. About an hour into the repast, Uncle Raymond arrived. Raymond Okafor is 58. He's Daddy's younger brother. He has been the family's attorney since before I was born. Wills, property transfers, business contracts, anything that required a signature and a notary stamp. He has an office on Commerce Street in downtown Harlow. He wears a suit even on weekends. He showed up that afternoon with a leather satchel over his shoulder and didn't stop to speak to anyone at the door. He walked straight to my father's home office at the end of the hallway, like he knew exactly where he was going, like he'd been there before, when no one else was home. Marcus was already waiting. The door closed. I went to the kitchen to refill the fruit tray. The home office is at the end of the hall. The kitchen is close enough. I set the fruit down on the counter and stood still. Through the door, I could hear Raymond's voice, low, clipped, the voice he uses when he's not asking. He's instructing. I could only catch pieces, something about accounts, something about the estate. And then, clear as anything, we need to get the Ridgecrest statements out of this house before she starts looking. She. Not a name. Just she. I went back to the living room. I set down the fruit tray. I smiled at someone's aunt from Macon, who told me my father always remembered her granddaughter's birthday. I said, "Yes, ma'am, that sounds like him." Then I slipped my phone out of my pocket and sent myself an email. One word, Ridgecrest. Everyone was gone by 9 that night. Mama took 2 Benadryl and went to bed. Marcus stayed another hour talking about estate logistics, telling Mama he'd handle everything, then kissed her cheek and left. I told him I was staying a few more days. He said that was fine, that wasn't necessary, but fine. He said it the way people say things when they mean the opposite. I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop. I started with what I knew. Okafor Build and Design was a legitimate company. I'd grown up watching my father build it, but it had subsidiaries I'd never paid close attention to. I wasn't involved in the business. I'd left Harlow at 18 on a scholarship and never really come back to stay. I typed Ridgecrest into the search bar connected to the Georgia Secretary of State's business registry. Ridgecrest Residential Partners, LLC, registered in 2008. Registered agent Raymond C. Okafor. Listed address, a P.O. box in Harlow. That was all the registry gave me. I took a screenshot. Then I went back to the email I'd sent myself and just sat with it. Ridgecrest Residential Partners, my uncle's name on it. Registered the same year my mother took out a loan to fix the water damage in the basement, and my father told her the business was in a slow year. I sat with my hands flat on the table for a while. Here's the thing about being a forensic auditor. After a while, you stop being surprised by what people hide. You get tired. You get efficient. You stop feeling much until later, until it's quiet, and then it lands all at once. I've cried in parking garages after client presentations. I've driven home from depositions in complete silence and then sat in my apartment hallway on the floor for 20 minutes before I could take my shoes off. That night, I didn't cry. I just sat there and let the picture start to form. I didn't sleep. The next morning, I woke up to coffee already made and Marcus sitting at the kitchen table. It was 7:15. He was in a press shirt. He had a folder in front of him and a notary stamp to the side. Mama was in her robe, holding a mug with both hands. I said good morning. Marcus said good morning. Nobody looked up right away. I poured myself coffee. I asked what the paperwork was. Marcus said it was a temporary financial authorization, so he could manage the family accounts and the business estate while Mama recovered and got her footing. Completely standard, he said, just a formality. Mama was already holding the pen. I said I'd like to read through it first. Marcus looked up then. He smiled. The thin kind he's always had, the one that doesn't move above the cheekbones. He said there was no need. It was routine. Their attorney had already reviewed it. I said, which attorney? He said, Raymond. I said I'd still like to read it. Mama looked between us. She said, baby, Marcus is just trying to help. I said, I know, Mama. I just want to see it. Silence. Marcus set down his pen. He picked up the folder and set it in front of me. I read every page. It was not a standard temporary authorization. It gave Marcus full discretionary management authority over the household accounts, the business accounts, and any estate assets pending probate. No term limit, no oversight clause, my mother's name on the bottom line. I looked at Marcus. I said, "This gives you access to everything indefinitely." He said it was until the estate was settled. I said, "That isn't what it says." Mama signed the last page. I watched her do it. I didn't stop her. Not yet, because I didn't have enough. And I have learned, the hard way, that the worst thing you can do when you don't have enough is tip your hand too soon. Marcus slid the folder under his arm, kissed Mama's forehead, said she didn't have to worry about a thing, and left. I sat there for a moment. Then I went upstairs and photographed the copy he left behind. That afternoon, Marcus went to a contractor meeting in town. He said he'd be back by 6. I went to my father's home office. The room smelled like him still. Cedar from the pencil sharpener he kept on the desk, something like engine oil, old paper. His drafting table was in the corner, blueprints rolled up in the standing tube container he'd had since before I was born. His desk chair had a permanent lean to the left from the way he always sat. I didn't let myself feel that yet. I sat at the desk and opened the filing cabinet. The drawer was unlocked. Inside, Okafor Build and Design, organized by year, going back to 1998. I flipped to the most recent years first, 2021, 22, 23. The main accounts looked clean. Project invoices, material receipts, payroll records, standard construction company paper trail, nothing unusual. Then I found a separate hanging folder in the back of the drawer, unlabeled, thicker than the others. Bank statements, a second account. The header read, Ridgecrest Residential Partners, LLC. Monthly wire transfers, $3,200, outbound, every single month. Labeled simply as Ops Transfer. Going back as far as the statements showed, which was 4 years. I started photographing pages, front and back. I worked fast and quiet, the way I learned in the field when you have access to something and you don't know for how long. I got through 4 years of statements, 37 pages, enough to see the pattern. Then I heard Marcus's truck in the driveway. He was 2 hours early. I closed the cabinet. I walked out of the office, down the hall, and into the kitchen. I was standing at the counter with a glass of water when he came through the door. He looked at me. I looked at him. He said the meeting ended early. I said, okay. I had 37 pages photographed. The pattern was clear, but 4 years wasn't the whole picture. I needed more. I went back upstairs. I sent the photos to my personal email. Then I texted Priya. Need to talk tonight. It's a Ridgecrest situation. Priya has been my colleague and my friend for 9 years. She texted back in under a minute. Call me at 8. Marcus and Uncle Raymond were in the home office that evening for nearly 2 hours. I made myself stay in the kitchen. I reheated food I didn't eat. I listened to the low rhythm of their voices through the wall and told myself to wait. When Raymond came out, he was carrying a large cardboard box, banker's box, the kind with the lid. He set it by the front door without saying anything to me. Marcus came out after him and told Mama he was taking Daddy's business files to Raymond's office for safekeeping during the estate process. Just to keep everything organized, he said. Just to protect it. Mama said, okay. Thank you, baby. I watched them load the box into Raymond's car. I stayed at the kitchen window with my coffee. I kept my face neutral. I am very good at keeping my face neutral. That night, after they both left, I went back to the filing cabinet. The drawer at the back, the one with the unlabeled folder, the Ridgecrest statements, was empty. They had taken everything except the years I'd already photographed. The rest of it, whatever went back further, whatever told the full story, was in that box, in Raymond's trunk, on its way to a law office where I had no access. I sat on the floor of my father's office for a while. This is what they counted on, that I would feel something too big to work through. That grief would slow me down or shut me up, that I would be a daughter first and figure out the rest later. They were not wrong that I was grieving. They were wrong about what grief does to me. I pulled up my phone and looked at the 37 photos again. 4 years of records. $3,200 a month, $153,600. That was just 4 years. The LLC had been registered in 2008, 15 years ago. I already knew what the math looked like. I do this for a living. I just needed to prove it. Priya Nair picked up on the second ring. I told her what I had, the LLC registration in my uncle's name, the outbound transfers, same amount, same label, every single month for 4 years minimum. The way Marcus and my uncle had cleared the office the moment I started asking questions. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Walk me through the account labeling again." I read her the ops transfer notation. She said, "Okay." She said, "Here's what I'm seeing. A structured disbursement, consistent amount, consistent timing, labeled vaguely enough to get through casual review, but specific enough to be a real account. Whoever set this up was not careless. This wasn't someone skimming. This was a system. She asked if I had the LLC's operating documents. I said, not yet. She said, get the secondary signatories if you can. That's where this gets complicated or simple. I said I'd work on it. She said, Camille, I'm sorry about your daddy. I know this isn't what you came home for. I said, I know, thank you. She said, do you want to do this together? I said, not yet. I need to understand what I'm looking at before I bring anyone else in. She said, okay, call me when you need me. I put the phone down and sat in the dark for a while. Here's the thing I didn't tell Priya yet. I wasn't just looking at a financial fraud. I was looking at my father's life. And the further I went into these records, the more I understood that the numbers weren't just evidence of money moving. They were evidence of a choice he made, over and over, for 17 years. $3,200 a month, never missed. Through slow business years and rough winters, and the year my mother took out a loan for the roof, and my father told her it was just a tight season, he never missed a single transfer. I thought about that a long time before I slept. 3 days after the burial, someone knocked on the front door at 10 in the morning. Mama was at a neighbor's house down the street. I was at the kitchen table with my laptop. I went to the door and opened it. The woman from the tree line was standing on the porch. Alone this time. No teenagers. She was wearing a white blouse and dark slacks, hair pulled back, no jewelry except small gold studs. She looked like a woman who had prepared for this, not rehearsed exactly. More like someone who had thought about it for a long time and decided she was done waiting. She said, "You must be Camille." I said, "I am." She said her name was Wanda Graves. She said she was sorry for my loss. She said Leonard had asked her to come after he was gone. He'd told her he would handle it himself first, tell my mother in his own time, in his own way. He never did. She had waited. She wasn't willing to wait anymore. She handed me an envelope. I didn't open it right there. I held it. I asked her to come in. She sat at my kitchen table, my father's kitchen table, with her hands folded in her lap. She wasn't nervous. She was past nervous. She looked like someone who had been nervous for 17 years and had nothing left in that particular direction. I opened the envelope at the table while she sat across from me. 2 birth certificates. Deshaun Marcus Graves Okafor, born September 4th, 2007. Father listed Leonard A. Okafor. Amara Joy, Graves Okafor, born March 17th, 2009. Father listed Leonard A. Okafor. A lease agreement, a house on Linden Avenue in East Harlow. Tenant Wanda L. Graves. Guarantor Leonard A. Okafor, renewed yearly. Starting date, January 2008. And a letter. Handwritten. My father's handwriting. I'd know it anywhere. The way he pressed hard on his capital letters and let his lowercase trail soft. I put the letter aside. I looked at Wanda. I said, "How long?" She said, "We met in 2005. It was serious from the start. She wasn't proud of all of it. She wasn't asking for absolution. She just wanted her children to exist on paper the way they existed in the world. She wanted what Leonard had promised and never delivered. I sat with that for a moment. Then I asked the question that mattered to me most. I said, "Did my brother know?" She paused for just a half second. She said, "Leonard always said he kept this separate, that it was just the two of them, him and her, and nobody in his family knew." I said, "Are you sure?" She said she could only tell me what Leonard told her. I thanked her for coming. She left. I sat at the table for a long time after the door closed. The letter was still in my hand. I knew the letter wasn't going to answer my question about Marcus, but I read it anyway because it was my father's handwriting and because sometimes you need to hear something even when you already know it's going to hurt. I read it at 2 a.m. at the kitchen table with a glass of water I didn't touch. My father wrote the way he talked, measured, deliberate, the careful phrasing of a man who learned early that words could be used against you and chose each one accordingly. His handwriting was steady and clear. He started with an apology to my mother. He said he had failed her. He said it plainly, without decoration, which was almost more painful than if he'd tried to explain it. He said he loved her and that love had never changed, and he understood if she didn't believe that. Then he wrote about Wanda. He said it started as something he had not planned and became something he could not end. He said he knew that sounded like an excuse. He said he wasn't offering it as one. He wrote about Deshawn and Amara. He said he loved them. He said they were his children, the same as Marcus and me were his children, and he couldn't pretend otherwise. He said he had tried in the years since they were born to make sure they were provided for. Housing, school, stability. He said he had arranged for Raymond to manage this discreetly so that Mama would never have to know. He wrote, "I always meant to tell Dolores myself. I wanted to be the one to say it. I thought I'd have more time." He was 63. He collapsed in the driveway on a Tuesday morning. He had been saying he would tell her for 17 years, and then he didn't have more time. I set the letter down. I thought about the year I was 22 when I called home from Columbus and told my parents I had gotten my first real job offer. My father cried. He actually cried on the phone. "Happy," he said. "I'm just so happy, Camille girl. You did something I could only dream about." I thought about the Saturday mornings he used to bring me to job sites when I was small. He'd put a hard hat on my head and walk me through the frames of houses before the walls went up, showing me how everything connected, where the load-bearing ran, where the plumbing would go, where the family would someday eat dinner. "This is how it holds," he'd say. "You have to understand the bones." I thought about all of that. Then I folded the letter and put it back in the envelope. I had bones to understand. I told Mama the next morning. I didn't wait for the right time. There is no right time. What I've learned, watching families tear apart over money and lies, is that waiting for the right time is just a softer way of protecting yourself from a hard conversation. My father waited for the right time for 17 years. I sat her down at the kitchen table. I put the birth certificates in front of her. I put the lease agreement beside them. I said, "Mama, I need you to look at this with me." She looked. She didn't say anything for a long time. She looked at Deshawn's birth certificate for a while, longer than the others. Her face didn't break. It just went very still, the way a body goes still when it's absorbing something too large to process all at once. She asked 2 questions. She said, "How long?" I said, "Since at least 2005. Possibly before." She was quiet. Then she said, "Did Marcus know?" I said, "That's what I'm trying to find out." She nodded once. She looked at the papers for another moment. Then she folded her hands on top of them, covering them, and asked me to leave her alone for a while. I went to the kitchen. I stood at the window. I looked at the driveway where my father had collapsed 11 days ago. 12 minutes later, I heard her. It was the kind of crying that doesn't want an audience. The kind that comes out in waves, suppressed, and then released, and then suppressed again. I stood in the kitchen and let her have it. I didn't go in. I didn't knock. I just stood there and listened to my mother figure out what to do with 34 years. When it was quiet again, I made 2 cups of tea and brought one to her room and left it on the nightstand and came back out without saying anything. She came out 2 hours later. She'd washed her face and changed her blouse, and she sat at the kitchen table like she was ready to work. She said, "Tell me what you know and what you need." I told her. I'd been working with the partial records I photographed, but I needed the full ownership structure of the Ridgecrest LLC. I went back to the Georgia Secretary of State's database. The annual registrations for Ridgecrest Residential Partners, LLC, were a matter of public record. What changed year to year? Who signed? Raymond was the registered agent throughout. But in the annual report filed for 2013, there was a new secondary signatory listed on the operating account, Marcus D. Okafor. He was 25 years old in 2013. He'd just joined my father's company full-time. I sat with that for a while. His name was not just present. It had been renewed every year since, every annual report, every signature cycle. He had been on that account for 10 years. The letter had made it sound like my father kept this entirely to himself, that Raymond helped manage the arrangement quietly and no one else in the family knew. That was the version Wanda believed, because that's what Leonard told her. It was not the full version. Marcus didn't find out later and stay quiet out of loyalty. Marcus had been brought into this at 25. He had signed onto that account a year into working for his father. He had been part of maintaining this system for a decade. I thought about the authorization papers he had Mama sign the morning after the funeral. I thought about the box of files Raymond carried out of this house. I thought about Marcus at 25, young, just starting out, his father showing him the ropes of the business, and somewhere in that conversation saying, "There is a second account, there is a second family, and I need you to help me keep it quiet." What do you say to your father in that moment? What do you say when the man who built everything you're standing on asks you to help him hold the floor up? I don't know what Marcus said. I know what he did. He signed his name. For 10 years. I called Priya. I found Marcus on the back porch that evening on his phone, 1 foot up on the railing the way he always stood. He heard me come out and kept his foot up. I said, "I need to talk to you." He said, "Can it wait? I'm in the middle of something." I said, "You've been on the Ridgecrest account since 2013. He lowered his phone. He looked at me for a moment. He had our father's eyes, same dark brown, same slight downward tilt at the outer corners. Right then they looked tired. He said, "Where did you get that?" I said, "Public record. Annual filings." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Look, Daddy asked me not to say anything. He said it was complicated. He said he was handling it. I was 25, Camille. What was I supposed to do?" I said, "Not sign your name to it." He started to say something else and I cut him off. I said I wasn't asking him to justify it. I was asking him to tell me what he'd moved out of these accounts in the last 9 days. He said, "That is not what happened." I said, "Marcus, I am a forensic auditor. I know what a wire transfer looks like." He looked at me. I looked at him. For a moment, it was very quiet. The back porch, the oak tree our father planted the year we were born, the yard he mowed every Saturday until 2 years ago when his knees started giving him trouble. Marcus said, "You need to go back to Atlanta. This is a family matter." I said, "I am family." He said, "You know what I mean. Mom needs to rest. She doesn't need you stirring all of this up right now." I said, "Mama already knows. I told her this morning." His face shifted. Not grief exactly, more like a man recalculating distances. He said, "You had no right to do that without talking to me first." I said, "I had every right. She's my mother." He said something I won't repeat. Then he went back inside and I heard him go upstairs. I stood on the back porch for a while. I looked at the oak tree. It was a big tree now. You could see how old it was from the width of the trunk, the way the roots had started to lift the soil around the base. My father had planted it the year Marcus was born. 37 years of growing steady and sure, right there in the yard. I went inside and called my attorney contact in Atlanta. My Aunt Marvella called that night at 9:45. Marvella Okafor is 67. She's my father's older sister. She lives in Augusta and drives a burgundy Cadillac and does not sugarcoat anything for anyone. She was at the funeral, but we hadn't had a real conversation. She'd hugged me once, hard, at the graveside, and then she was in the middle of a crowd and I was in the middle of something else. When she called, she said, "Camille, I've been sitting on something and I need to put it down." I said, "Okay, Aunt Vella." She said she knew about Wanda. Not the money. She hadn't known about the accounts. But years ago, back in 2012, she had seen Leonard in Augusta at a hardware store. He was with Wanda. She didn't know who Wanda was at first. She asked Leonard later that week, and he told her there was a complicated situation and he needed her to give him time to handle it. He said, "Please, Vella, not yet." She had not said a word for 11 years. She said she wasn't proud of that. She said she told herself it wasn't her place. It wasn't her marriage. Leonard was her brother, and she didn't want to be the one who tore the family apart. She said she understood now that silence had its own cost. Then she said, "He called me in January, left me a voicemail. I still have it." I said, "What did it say?" She said, "He said he wasn't feeling right. Said his chest had been bothering him and the doctor wanted to do tests. He said if something happened, he needed me to make sure Dolores was taken care of. He said," and she quoted it exactly, "Don't let Marcus handle everything." Those words, "Don't let Marcus handle everything." I sat very still. I said, "Aunt Vella, I need you to not delete that voicemail." She said, "Baby, I saved it the day he left it. It's still right there." She sent me the audio file that night. I listened to it twice. My father's voice, low and careful the way it always was. The specific instruction, unprompted, clear. Don't let Marcus handle everything. He knew at the end what he had built. He knew what he had asked Marcus to hold, and he was trying in the only quiet way he could manage to put a limit on it. Too late, Daddy, but I heard you. Her name was Diane Farrell, Atlanta Estate and Probate Law. Priya had referred me. We met over video call on a Saturday morning, 10 days after the funeral. I walked her through everything. The photographed bank statements, the LLC filings, the secondary signatory records, the authorization papers Mama had signed, the voicemail from Marvella, the birth certificates from Wanda. Diane listened without interrupting. She asked 3 clarifying questions. Then she was quiet for a moment. She said, "Your mother has a strong case. What Marcus obtained with that authorization was overly broad, arguably obtained under duress given the circumstances, and your uncle's long-term management of that LLC while serving as the family's attorney almost certainly constitutes a conflict of interest that breached fiduciary duty." She said, "The money that moved through Ridgecrest, all 17 years of it, if you can establish that, that is estate property that was diverted without your mother's knowledge or consent. She is entitled to pursue recovery." I asked about the criminal exposure. She said that was a question for a criminal attorney, which she wasn't, but that what she was describing was, in the civil space, serious. I asked what we needed to do first. She said, "Your mother needs to revoke that financial authorization Marcus obtained immediately, and then we formalize her representation before anything else moves." Mama was sitting in the kitchen when I came off the call. I told her what Diane had said. She asked, "Can we get the money back?" I said, "Some of it, not all of it, but some." She thought about that. She said, "How much did he take?" I showed her the full calculation I'd worked out from the records I had, the partial statements, plus the LLC registration dates, plus the consistent transfer amount. The full 17 years came to somewhere between $700,000 and $800,000. My mother sat with that number for a long moment. Then she said, "That's why I had to refinance the house." I said, "Yes, Mama." She said, "That's why I cashed in my teacher's pension early. He told me we needed it for the business." I said, "Yes." She was quiet. Then she said, "All right, tell the attorney to do what needs to be done." 3 weeks after the funeral, a certified letter went out from Diane's office to Raymond C. Okafor, attorney at law, Commerce Street, Harlow, Georgia. Formal notice, contested estate. Potential civil claims, document preservation demand, a full accounting of all transactions connected to Ridgecrest Residential Partners, LLC, to be provided within 30 days. I was still in Harlow when it happened. I was at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee when Marcus called. He called twice. I let both go to voicemail. The third time I picked up. He didn't say hello. He said, "What did you do?" I said, "I'm protecting Mama's interests." He said, "You are blowing up this family. You know that? You think this is what Dad would have wanted?" I said, "I think Daddy should have thought about what he wanted before he set up a second household and billed it to Mama's retirement fund." Silence. He said, "That is not fair." I said, "Marcus, you signed your name to that account at 25 years old and you kept signing it for 10 years. You helped move documents out of this house the day after we buried our father. I am not doing anything to this family. This was already done." He said, "If you keep going with this, there are things that are going to come out that you are not going to want out." I said, "Then let them out." Another silence. Then he said, "You've always had to be the smart one. You've always had to be the one who figures everything out." I said, "Yes, I have. And right now, that is the only thing keeping Mama from losing this house." He hung up. I set the phone down. I refilled my coffee. I went back to the table. 20 minutes later, Mama came into the kitchen and stood at the counter and asked if I wanted eggs. I said yes. She made them the way she always did. Scrambled, a little pepper, the way Daddy liked them. I didn't say anything about that. She set them in front of me and sat down across from me, and we ate breakfast together, just the two of us, in that kitchen. It was the first quiet moment we'd had since the funeral. I didn't waste it. First Sunday after the estate matter became known in Harlow. Small towns do not keep legal notices quiet. Someone at the county clerk's office saw the filing. Someone at the clerk's office told someone at their church. By Sunday morning, it had moved through 3 congregations and a barber shop. Mama was going to First Baptist. She said she'd been going every Sunday for 31 years, and she was not going to stop now. I went with her. Marvella drove up from Augusta. The 3 of us walked in together, Mama in the middle, Marvella on her left, me on her right, Mama in her good navy dress with the white buttons. Head up, hands folded at her waist. She walked to the front pew the same way she had walked into that church every Sunday since I was 5 years old. People looked. Some looked away. The service was fine, normal. Pastor Hollifield did not mention anything specific, and I appreciated that. Afterward, in the vestibule, 2 women from the church mothers board approached me. Both of them had known my father for decades. Both of them were women I had grown up respecting. The taller one said, "Camille, we've been praying for your family. We do want to say, these matters, sometimes they're better handled quietly, within the family. You know how Leonard was respected in this community. A legal situation like this, the attention it brings." I let her finish. Then I said, "I appreciate the prayers. Truly. But Mrs. Watkins, quiet is what got us here. My mother spent 34 years not knowing where the money went. I'm not going to keep that kind of peace." The woman looked at me for a moment. Then she nodded once and said, "I hear you." She didn't agree with me, but she heard me. Mama was waiting near the door. Marvella had her arm linked through Mama's. I walked over and took her other side, and we walked out into the Sunday morning together. 4 months after the funeral, the matter settled. Diane called me on a Wednesday afternoon. I was at my desk in Atlanta. First week I'd been fully back at work. I walked out to the hallway to take the call. She said, "The court has approved the settlement. Your mother recovers $540,000. I said, "How much was total?" She said, "Based on full documentation, $782,000 over 17 years. The remainder had already been spent. The Linden Avenue house, private school tuition for the children, medical expenses. Funds already disbursed cannot be recovered." I said, "And Raymond?" She said, "The state bar complaint has been filed. His case is pending review. His office in Harlow closed last week." She paused. "And Marcus?" "He's removed from the estate entirely. The civil judgment against him stands. He won't face criminal charges, but the judgment will follow him." I said, "And Wanda's children?" She said, "That was part of the negotiation as you requested." Deshaun and Amara are included in the estate distribution as Leonard's acknowledged children. It's a modest amount, but it's on the record. They exist in the estate the same way they existed in his life. I stood in the hallway of my office building, holding my phone, looking at the wall. I thought about that for a moment, not with warmth exactly, more with a kind of plain recognition. Those two teenagers at the tree line on the day we buried my father, they had been kept off the record for their entire lives. Their father's name was on their birth certificates and nowhere else. They deserved to be in the record. Whatever my father did or didn't do, that part wasn't their fault. I said thank you to Diane. I hung up. I went back to my desk and sat for a few minutes before I opened my laptop. $540,000. Mama could fix the roof again. Properly this time. She could pay off the second mortgage. She could start a savings account with her own name on it and nobody else's. It wasn't everything, but it was enough to stand on. The morning of the mediation closing, I saw Wanda in the parking lot outside the office building. She was by herself. She had a paper coffee cup in one hand and her car keys in the other. She looked like a woman at the end of a long process. Not relieved exactly, more like someone who had finally put something down that had been too heavy for a long time. She saw me. I walked over. She said, "Thank you, Camille, for what you pushed for with the children." I said, "I didn't do it for you." She said, "I know." We stood there for a moment. It wasn't comfortable. It wasn't supposed to be. Then she said, "He talked about you all the time. He was proud of you in a way he didn't always know how to say to your face. He said you were going to do something he couldn't even imagine." I looked at her. I thought about that. Then I said, "He was right that he couldn't imagine it. He didn't know what I could do." She nodded. There was something in her face, not pity, more like recognition. Woman to woman. I said, "I hope your kids are okay." She said, "They will be." I got in my car. I sat there for a moment before I started the engine. Wanda had not ruined my family. My father had made choices for 17 years. Wanda had made choices too, and I wasn't going to pretend otherwise. But the person who had held the blueprint, who had designed the whole structure, that was Leonard. He built it. He maintained it. He handed it to Raymond and eventually to Marcus to keep standing. I started the engine and pulled out of the lot. I didn't look back. Mama calls every Sunday morning, 8:30 sharp. She has always been punctual. 6 months after the funeral, she called at 8:30 and said, "I went to the bank on Thursday." I said, "What for?" She said, "I opened a savings account." I said, "Under your name?" She said, "Just my name. Nobody else's. No joint anything. Just me." I could hear something in her voice. Not happiness exactly. More like steadiness. The kind you feel when you've done something small that was, for reasons you shouldn't have to explain, actually enormous. She said, "I felt embarrassed the whole time. 61 years old, and I'm sitting there explaining to a 24-year-old bank teller that I want an account in my name only." She was very nice about it. I felt like a fool anyway. I said, "You're not a fool, Mama." She said, "I know that. I'm telling you how I felt." Then she paused. "But here's what I also felt." I said, "What?" She said, "Like myself. Like this was mine. This particular thing." I didn't try to make it bigger than she was making it. I didn't add anything. I just said, "Good, Mama." She said, "How are you doing?" I said, "I'm okay." She said, "Are you sleeping?" I said, "Better than I was." She said, "Good. Come home at Christmas." I said, "Yes, ma'am." She said, "Marvella is coming too. We're going to cook the whole thing ourselves this year." None of this catered nonsense Marcus started. I said, "That sounds right." We talked for 20 more minutes about nothing in particular. A book she was reading, the new contractor who was redoing her bathroom, a neighbor's dog that kept getting into her yard, normal Sunday things. When we hung up, I sat in my apartment for a while. I thought about my mother at the bank. 61 years old, a little embarrassed, completely herself. My father built 312 houses in Harlow County. He taught a generation of contractors how to lay a foundation that holds. He coached Little League for 11 years and built the addition on First Baptist and showed up, as people said, everywhere that mattered. He also built a second life with another woman's money, his family's money. Over and over for 17 years, he made that choice. I've had to learn to hold both of those things. It doesn't get easier. You just stop expecting it to be easy. The savings account was a start. Everything had to start somewhere. 3 months later, Wednesday night, my apartment in Atlanta. Here's where things stand. Raymond's law license has been suspended for 18 months, pending full bar review. He closed his Commerce Street office and has not returned to Harlow as far as anyone has told me. I have not reached out to him and don't plan to. Marcus is still in Harlow. He doesn't manage Okafor Build and Design anymore. The senior crew, men who had worked for my father for 20 and 30 years, completed an employee buyout last month. They renamed the company. New name, same crew. They build good houses. My father taught them that much, and you can't take it back just because the man who taught them was flawed. Marcus and I don't talk regularly. He texted on Mama's birthday. I texted back. That's where we are. I don't hate him. I don't trust him. Those two things can exist at the same time. I've learned that. Wanda and Mama are not friends. That was never the point. But Wanda brought Deshawn and Amara by the house once, around the new year. They sat in the kitchen and had tea and talked about the weather and the kids' school schedules. Nobody mentioned Leonard. It was about 45 minutes. When they left, Mama called me that evening and said, "Those are just children. That's all they are." And she was right. That's all they are. Amara texted me 2 weeks ago. She said she'd been researching accounting programs at her school and wanted to know if forensic auditing was as dry as it sounded. I wrote back, "Only if you let it be." She sent back a string of laughing faces. I saved the exchange. I don't know what we are to each other. Not sisters, not nothing. Something in between that doesn't have a clean name. I'm not in a rush to name it. My apartment is quiet on Wednesday nights in a way I have come to appreciate. No spreadsheets on the table right now. No legal folders. No evidence. Just my laptop and a cup of tea going cold because I keep forgetting to drink it. I've been thinking about something Marvella said to me the last time she called. She said, "Your daddy was a man who could build anything except the honesty to hold his own life together." She said it without bitterness, just plainly the way she says most things. I've been sitting with that. I used to introduce my father as a good man. I said it the way you say something you've never had to question. A good man, a cornerstone, a man who shows up. I said it at his funeral and I meant it, and I also know now that it wasn't the whole sentence. He was a man. He was complicated and sometimes tender and selfish in ways he never fully admitted, and capable of extraordinary care, and capable of sustained betrayal. He loved his children, all 4 of us, however he arranged it. He loved building things that stood up. He loved this county and this community, and I believe, in his particular limited way, he loved my mother. None of that cancels the other things. You don't get to hold the good and dissolve the rest. What I know now is this: the bones of a thing matter. My father used to say that when he walked me through those unfinished houses, you have to understand the bones. You have to know where the load bears and where the structure is sound and where the weak points are before you start putting up the walls. He understood that about houses. He never applied it to himself. I do. I've made that my work. Not just in the office, in everything. I want to know what's carrying the weight and whether it can hold and what happens if it doesn't. I don't want to be the woman standing in a kitchen at 61, learning for the first time where the money went. I won't be. The tea is cold now. I get up and pour it out and go to the window. Atlanta is lit up out there. The skyline I drove toward 8 years ago when I left Harlow on a scholarship with my father's voice in my ear. Go make me proud, Camille girl. I thought I was running toward something. I was. I just didn't know I was also leaving behind a lie I hadn't found yet. I found it. I'm not proud of what it was. I'm not ashamed of what I did with it. That's enough to stand on. That's enough. If this story resonated with you, leave a like and consider subscribing. You can also drop any comment below, even just one word. Maybe tell me where you're watching from, or what time it is right now. Sometimes one word is enough to say you were here.